Hello Fast Fam, thanks for tuning in. I'm Craig Lieberman and I've been tinkering on cars since 1980. I've owned more than 40 cars in my life. Some were heroes, some were zeros. But never in my wildest dreams would I ever guess that 3 of my cars would go on to star in a motion picture franchise. My Supra, my GTR, and my Maxima all had starring roles in Universal's Fast and Furious movies. Over the next 3 years, I'd served Universal as a technical advisor. I helped choose the cars, procure the parts, oversee their builds, and support both production and post-production. I've got some great stories to tell, and that's why I created this channel. I hope you like the video. I've talked about this in my book called Crashing Cars on Amazon, a book I released about 3 years ago, but I also realized that not all of my followers have read the book, so I decided to do this video. I've also told the story to many close friends over the years, but it's worth covering in the video, so for this episode, I'm going to talk about my Supra and how it got cast, and how Nitrous Oxide got introduced into the franchise. It was early in the year 2000, and I was attending an import car show in Manhattan Beach with my then yellow 1994 Toyota Supra. An older gentleman, older than I am now, named David Martyr, approached me while I was standing next to my car. Perhaps he felt more comfortable talking to someone a little closer to his own age. My Supra had been built as a show car. I had painted it, added a body kit, some gritty parts, and some wheels, and a buddy of mine, Wadi Hammam, worked down the street from Stillen at Nitrous Oxide Systems. I hit him up for a nitrous system to help complete the car. NOS agreed and did a sponsorship for me. 2 big 10-pound polished bottles were placed in the rear hatch, and the full install was done at NOS's building. Boy, how that seemingly meaningless act of kindness paid them dividends for many years. When David Martyr first saw my Supra at the show, it had just recently been completed. David told me that he was working on a project and wanted to know if he could ask some questions about the car. The questions really revolved around which cars were at the top of the tuner food chain, what was cool, what made them special, and what differentiated them from one another. After about an hour of discussion, he thanked me for the information and went on his way. I didn't think much about it, actually. A couple days later, I was sitting in my office, which was in Beverly Hills, and the phone rang. At the time, I was the executive director of NYRA, the National Import Racing Association, which was wholly owned by the same company that published Super Street Magazine, Max Power USA, Hot Rod Magazine, and dozens of other magazine titles. On the other end of this line was a gentleman who had seen our advertisement for NYRA Racing in one of the magazines. He asked if he could come down to my office and ask me some questions as he was working on doing a little research for a little project. 3 days later, he was sitting in my office and I recognized him immediately, but he had not yet recognized me. This was the same guy with whom I just spoke a few days earlier, David Martyr. David started to tell me about this movie project that was going to revolve around these rice rocket cars. The first thing that came to my mind at that point was that if Hollywood was going to make a movie about the tuner scene, it's going straight to fucking DVD because it's gonna suck. During the discussion, he saw this framed magazine feature on my wall in my office, this one right here. And he said, "These are the kind of cars we're looking for. Do you know where we can find these kind of cars?" And I, of course, said, yes, I knew. I can tell you where there are a whole bunch of them are. David suddenly realized that we had met almost a week earlier and he recognized me from the car. I told him that I had many friends who could help us find these cars and it wouldn't be a problem. So David invited me to lunch at Delmonico's, a little restaurant down the street, handed me a script, put a $100 bill on top of it, and the title said Racer X, aka Redline. The script was dated January 7th, 2000. David said, "Here's $100 for your time, read through it and get back to me with your thoughts, your comments, and your suggestions." Okay, popped it in my briefcase. The next day I was on an airplane flying to a NYRA race on the East Coast, and with 5 hours to kill, I took the script out from my briefcase and started to go through it. A lot of what I read in the script was cheesy dialogue, stereotypical banter, and the razor-thin plot line that held it all together, and it was very, very different from what we saw in the finished movie. Here are some examples. Brian's first car, according to script, was going to be a bright green Supra that came from the police impound. Since it had been confiscated for not being street legal, it couldn't be auctioned, so Brian would end up getting the car that way. Once Brian's Supra was shot up, as the Eclipse was, the script had Brian switching to a 240SX. But in another script revision, the 240SX was eventually changed to an Eclipse. Harry from Racer's Edge was to be a black man named Harry Jackson. Could have been worse, it could be Harry Johnson. But he also had a prosthetic leg and he was essentially one eye patch away from being an actual fucking pirate. Brian was originally to be sent to a place called Toretto's Lunch Counter to get Harry a corned beef sandwich on a French roll with mustard, not a tuna on white with the crust cut out. In the first truck hijacking sequence, the truck driver was going to be blown away with a shotgun. However, the publishers at Super Street pushed back, not wanting to portray tuners as murderers. Hey, we might be outlaws for deleting smog equipment, right? But we're not hijacking trucks full of dated electronics. Universal agreed to change the story to show truck drivers only being shot with a tranquilizer gun, and everybody was happy. Vince's car was originally written to be a yellow Honda Civic. Vince, of course, was too big to fit in a yellow Honda Civic, so that was ruled out. Leon's blue car was to be a Toyota Celica GT, which we don't know which generation. Of course, he wound up in an R33 GTR. Letty's car was to be a magenta Mitsubishi Eclipse, explains why the 240XX was magenta. Hector's car was supposed to be a 300ZX, but that was ruled out because it was too close to Brian's Supra and RX-7 and Dom's RX-7 in the food chain. Edwin's car was never slated to be an Acura at all. In fact, it was originally written to be a 66 Chevelle with a supercharged small block Chevy. Wow, okay. Letty's character wasn't even supposed to be Dom's sister. In fact, Letty was originally supposed to be Brian's love interest. Michelle ruled that out early as she didn't want to be cast as a slut, and Vin Diesel backed her up. Jesse's car was originally written to be a Volkswagen Bug. The fact that it was a VW, and that's the way it was written into the script, gave me the idea to get a Jetta, and I knew I could find a Jetta. Mia's car was originally written in as a Honda Accord, and Mia was to be an art student, not a nursing student. The Supra versus the Ferrari race on PCH was supposed to be the Supra versus a red Lamborghini Diablo GT, but we ended up borrowing a black Ferrari from Neil Moritz, the producer, partly because the black color is typically used to designate an antagonist, and it was cheaper to borrow it from Neil rather than renting it from a private owner. Johnny Tran's car was originally written in as a Mustang. I argued against that, stating that we needed fast cars. Kidding, don't get fucking crazy on me. I actually had several Mustangs in my life, so don't send me hate mail. In reality, it was switched to a tuner car, in keeping with the initial focus on the import street racing world. And the most insane thing that caught my eye was that Dom's dad's Charger was originally written to be a 1990 Buick Regal. What the actual fuck? Not even a Grand National, a Buick Regal. A front-wheel drive, 3.1 liter V6 with a slush box automatic, a car reserved for geriatrics that does 0 to 60 in 11 seconds and a quarter mile in 18 seconds. Thank God I got the opportunity to provide some input on that. You have to wonder how history would have been different. There were many, many more things that were different in the original script, including the fact that the final Supra versus the Charger race was supposed to end with a cliffhanger, with the scene cutting just as the cars jumped the tracks, but with Dom clearly leading. That too was changed because the final crash stunt was much more satisfying, and the more stunts in a car movie, the better it is. As I read the script, it was clear that someone had done at least some research on the different types of tuner cars, but it was also clear that the writers didn't really know that a Mitsubishi Eclipse was not at the top of the tuner food chain, and so Brian should not end up in an Eclipse, but he should start off with one, or at least he could start off with one. So there was a lot of that going on behind the scenes. Still, with some tweaking, the basic building blocks of the story were there, and I thought they were totally workable with some revisions. After I got back to LA, I called David and basically told him my thoughts. I essentially said that it had great possibilities, but it was going to need some tweaking if you're really after some authenticity. David agreed and asked me to come up to Universal to talk to some people. Oh, and he asked if I wouldn't mind bringing the Supra so he could show it to these people. I, of course, agreed, and a date was set. Within a week or two, I arrived at Universal's Lancashire gate off the side and pulled up to the guard shack. There was this very serious looking dude there. He looked kind of like a Mike Ehrmantraut kind of dude from Breaking Bad. And I gave him my name, and he didn't really say anything. He just grabbed his phone, called upstairs, said, "He's here." Click. And then he says, "Pull over there and don't move." I thought I was in trouble, like I was in the wrong gate or whatever. So this guy pulls up in a little golf cart thing with a little siren on the top, you know. Pulls around, parks in front of my car, comes over, he says, "Are you Craig Lieberman?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Follow me and don't go anywhere." I said, "Okay." Again, I thought I was in trouble. He pulls me over to this restaurant area. It's called the Commissary. It's where all the actors and producers and crew work or go to lunch if they're working on sound stages. Jumps out of that little cart, puts some stanchions around the car, and then he says, "Just wait here. They'll be with you in a minute." Not even 5 minutes later, this whole entourage comes down. Rob Cohen, the director, Neil Moritz, Valdemar Kalinowski was the production designer, I think he was. Creighton Ballinger, one of the script writers, Chris Morgan, one of the script writers, Paul, Vin, and a whole bunch of other people that I'd meet later whose names I forget off the top of my head. Immediately, they swarm around the car. I was like, you know, just a mass of people. And I had the hood open, I had the trunk open, they were asking all kinds of questions. You gotta remember the car was yellow at the time, but it did have the big single turbo, it had the audio system in the trunk and all that, and people were geeking out, asking all kinds of questions. What's this, what does that do, why do you need this, that kind of stuff. So after a little while, Rob, the director, says to me, you mind taking me for a ride? I said, sure, what the hell. So we jump in the car, had the Targa top off, it was a warm day, it was early, mid-afternoon, during a weekday, and there wasn't a lot of traffic. That's kind of a dead time on the freeway, at least it was 20 years ago. And I pulled out of the gate, made a left, went down to the freeway, the 101 North, jumped on the freeway, rolled through second gear, third gear as I crested the top of the ramp. I got on the pipe, ran it up to, I don't know, 6,500 RPMs, ran all the way through third, ran all the way through fourth, and I backed off at about I don't know, $120, $130. In the middle of my acceleration, Rob was screaming. He's like, is that the NOS? I'm like, no, that's the turbo. Whatever it is, I like it. And so we cruised and got off on the next ramp, turned around and came back. Rob had a bunch of questions as we came back, but the drive other than that was uneventful. Pulled back in, parked the car, got out of the car. People started to gather around again. Some little mini conversations were happening in small groups. And then the tram comes around the corner. If you've ever been to the Universal Studios tour, you know the tram that goes around and they do the tour. Well, at that time they were touring around that part of the back lot. Eventually it takes them right into the plaza where Back to the Future was filmed and many, many other movies and TV shows. But the tram comes around the corner and the dude recognizes Rob Cohen. He says, oh, look, everybody, it's Rob Cohen. He did Running Man and with Arnold Schwarzenegger, And I was like, I didn't even know this. Hey, Rob, what are you doing? And Rob looks over and goes, I'm putting this car in my next movie. And I'm like, he is? What the fuck? I didn't even know what to think. It went in my head and I was just processing it. He goes, oh, you have a great day, man. And the guy just drives off. And so I'm still kind of stunned by what I heard. So they asked me a few more questions and then they invite me back upstairs for a meeting in their office. And I had never been in a director's office. Once I was in Rob Cohen's office, it looked exactly like I imagined a Hollywood director's office would look like. Pictures of him with various superstar actors like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Shining Gold Awards, pictures of him directing movies, all kinds of stuff. And the place was a mess. There's paperwork all over the place. I tell this story in greater detail in my book, and if you haven't purchased one from Amazon, I hope you'll consider picking one up. Anyway, so I'm sitting here trying to take all this in, and in this meeting was Dave Marter, Rob Cohen, Neil Moritz, Creighton Ballinger, Valdemar Kalinowski, all the same people that were downstairs. About a dozen people in total, but Paul and Vin didn't stick around for the meeting. They went off to do actor stuff, I guess. So I'm sitting there and the meeting started with Rob asking for my input, and I said very politely that it was clear that they were on the right track, and if they shuffled the car assignments around a little bit better, I think it would come off as being more authentic. You can't start off with a top tier car and go to a lower tier car. When I was asked to elaborate, I basically went up to the whiteboard and listed the food chain of tuner cars, just as you would expect. At the top of the list, Nissan GTR, Acura NSX, Toyota Supra, 3000 GT, Mazda RX-7, 300ZX, 240SX, and so on. You have to remember, though, this was the year 2000. There were a lot of tuner cars that weren't even made yet or even sold here. Cars like the 350Z, not here yet. WRX, the Lexus IS, and many, many others. I've done a complete video on how the cars were cast, so I won't go off on a tangent, so I hope you check out that video. In the meeting, we discussed options, and it was then that I learned that the budget for picture cars was $2 million in total. That includes building all the stunt replicas. Trying to do some simple math in my head, it was certainly feasible, but time is going to be the big issue because many of these cars took months to build. I asked how they were going to get the parts to build these cars, and Rob asked if I had any connections. I said I sure did, given that I had spent the last 10 years of my life in the automotive aftermarket, so I probably knew some people that could help. Rob's reply was very happy, and he was pretty short and to the point. He said, great, you're hired. You're our technical advisor. I was like, what just happened? David Marter will get you the paperwork. That's all. Thanks for coming in. And that was it. That was the end of the meeting. And with that, David and I adjourned to the lobby area and we hammered out the details. And a week later, I had a contract in hand. And a short time after that, I was on a conference call with the screenwriters Chris Morgan and Creighton Bellinger, having more discussions. I went over some suggested changes to the script, and they got back to work doing their thing. Shortly after that, David asked me to put together weekly casting calls for tuner cars. This was before Facebook, before YouTube, and MySpace was really the only real social media platform other than automotive forums, which sucked. Fortunately, I knew the right people, and with their help, we were able to reach out to the local car groups and invite them to Universal's Fridays casting calls. A lot of people helped with that process, and I want to thank them all. The amazing part about these casting calls was that although there were certain cars we wanted or were considering, if the producers couldn't see one in real life, at one of these casting calls, that type of car had to be ruled out. And you have to wonder what type of car could have been cast had the owner just bothered to go to one of the casting calls. Maybe they didn't know about it. At one of the later casting calls, though, it got interesting. Vin Diesel and Paul Walker appeared again. Both of them were given the opportunity to drive their characters' cars. That means Paul got to drive my Supra, and Vin got to drive the RX-7 that belonged to Keith Emoto. Paul took the same route that we did with Rob, and I think it was the first single turbo car he had ever driven, and when he drove it, basically the one thing he said was, "Holy shit, this thing pulls hard." I wish I had pictures of that day, but I didn't know who the hell Paul was, and I didn't know who Vin Diesel was, and now I regret it. But with the cars now cast, it was time to get to work building the replicas. Within a few weeks, the picture car department was set up in a warehouse in El Segundo, run by Eddie Paul, and we started building replicas of the hero cars. Each of the hero cars, remember, was rented from a private owner, something that Universal does very rarely now. They usually buy them and build what they want. But building cosmetic replicas of the cars meant cutting some corners, especially given our budget, and things like dark tinted windows were used to hide the fact that we didn't do full interior replications on the stunt cars. I've covered this in other videos. One thing was clear though, the producers had a serious hard-on for Nitrous. Once Rob got a look at the polished bottles in the trunk of the Supra, Nitrous systems found their way into every main character's car except Leon's GTR and Vince's Maximum. It was so out of control, we were actually drilling holes into airbag steering wheels to add fake nitrous buttons. Yes, we removed the airbags. Picture car mechanics aren't fucking stupid. I heard phrases being tossed around the production meetings that essentially referred to nitrous oxide as being quote unquote like a rocket engine for the car. I knew we were heading down a dangerous path. And so we saw nitrous installed or portrayed as having been installed in the RX-7, the Eclipse, the Jetta, the S2000, the 240SX, and the Supra. Of those 6 cars, only the Supra had an actual working nitrous system. Forget what you saw on the film or in the film, it was bullshit. A couple of the cars had NOS labels actually added to the steering wheel. And the NOS, of course, came from the brand stickers on the nitrous bottles, which represented NOS systems, right? Those buttons were put there so that audiences could understand what the buttons were for. Otherwise, they'd be hitting buttons and audiences would be lost. Picture car guys, of course, knew damn well that nitrous oxide wasn't often referred to as NOS, since that was a brand name. On the street, we used phrases like on the bottle, spraying, or squeezing, but in dialogue, they kept saying NOS, NOS, NOS. And after the movie, the phrase NOS became commonplace among audiences who were basically less experienced in the automotive aftermarket, the automotive scene. Not surprisingly, the final edit of the film portrayed nitrous as if it added 300 horsepower to any car. This we call artistic license, and things like the blurring and scenery at speed were designed to create the sense of speed for audiences to understand. I think that actually was probably a good idea, given that most of these cars would struggle to break into the 13s in a quarter-mile contest, and that's kind of hard to make that look fast on camera. The script went through several more revisions over the coming months, but unlike in the subsequent films, once the main cars were cast, there were no changes. We weren't switching around. We were committed to the cars that we had chosen, and we were going to live or die with them. I also worked hard with Universal's production team to provide technical terms that they could use on set. But as we all know, they were clearly just taking irrelevant snippets of dialogue and dropping them in wherever they wanted to. I'll cover all these technical gaffes in another video, so be patient. As for NOS's sponsorship donation to my Supra, I ran into Waddy years later at the SEMA show, and he told me that sales were up over 1,000%, and even after 3 years, they were still having problems keeping polished nitrous bottles on the shelf. So it obviously helped them. Unlike the subsequent movies, each of the Hero 1 cars for this movie, as I said, were rented from private owners. We did repaint most of them, we added graphics to all of them, and even changed some of the body kits or wheels. But owners were paid between $4,000 and $10,000 for rental fees, and we kept the cars about a month. They were also given money to repaint their cars after the movie if they chose to do so. If they didn't, they could keep the money. Many of these cars were sold after the movie or completely changed after filming. Some were even changed before the Hollywood premiere was scheduled in June of that year. Today, these cars are skyrocketing in value because, let's face it, after Tokyo Drift, the premise of the cars being the stars was gone, and the franchise has now evolved into super spy thrillers that would make Michael Bay say, "Oh dear God." Anyway, I hope you enjoy the ride, and I promise you that you'll be pleasantly surprised in Fast 10. Thanks for following, thanks for watching, and please hit the subscribe button. Thanks again, everybody.